There's always that one person who ruins family game night. Like maybe your round of Monopoly is going great, until your sister lands on Park Place and has to fork over all her cash, and then she screams and rage flips the game board. And while this meltdown is kind of funny, her reaction can actually help us understand how people handle conflict. At first glance, your sister might seem like a person who totally loses it every time there's a conflict. But it's also possible that the context of this specific Monopoly game made her feel extra competitive. Maybe because she's sick of getting pushed around by her older brothers. In a totally different situation, like at school, she might have a really positive attitude, even when she loses. Because the context is different, your sister reacts differently too. Today, we're going to take a look at conflict and conflict styles in lots of different contexts. That way, we can better understand where conflict comes from and how to handle it when it pops up. I'm Cassandra Ryder, and this is Study Hall, Intro to Human Communication. Conflict, like the one at game night, arises between people who perceive that there are incompatible goals or not enough resources in a situation or relationship. For example, conflict might arise between political parties who don't agree on policies, or even between countries negotiating new trade agreements. But conflict can happen in any relationship or community, like between two friends who are trying to pick a dinner spot. In most cases, conflict is normal and natural. Healthy conflict can help us solve problems, make decisions, and get along better. But for conflict to result in positive outcomes, like growth and harmony, we have to know how to navigate it in healthy ways using conflict management styles. Conflict management styles are communication strategies we use to handle conflict. Each style is designed to do one of two things during a conflict. 1, help you meet your personal goals, also known as self-goals, or 2, help you meet another person's goals, or other goals. For example, if your one and only goal in a conflict is to totally crush your opponent in Monopoly, you'd probably use a conflict style that places all of the emphasis on self-goals. And you definitely wouldn't want to help your competitors win. So you wouldn't want to choose a conflict style focused on other goals. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. If you want to find a way for everyone to win, you'd use a conflict style that balances self-goals and other goals. The 5 most common conflict management styles are competing, avoiding, accommodating, compromising, and collaborating. Each conflict management style leads you down a different path to resolving conflict and results in different outcomes. So choose wisely. To learn more about each conflict style, let's take a look at how they can be applied when a conflict pops up in a relationship. Once upon a time, in the land of very far away, 2 newlyweds named Trek and Leona are gearing up for a royal ball to celebrate their marriage, which is kind of nerve-wracking since Trek is meeting his in-laws for the first time, and they also happen to be the king and queen. Trek is pretty sure they won't be thrilled to find out that he's an ogre, which turns out to be the case when the king and Trek have a huge fight over supper. Leona is really upset by their behavior, so she flees the scene and locks herself in her room, which is what someone using the avoidant conflict style might do. People who use the avoidant style want to steer clear of the discomfort of communicating directly about a conflict, so they'll often make jokes, drop hints, and suppress their feelings. This shows a low concern for self-goals and a low concern for other goals. But avoiding conflict is only a temporary solution. When people repeat a behavior that bugs us and we don't address it, our frustration and the intensity of the conflict can build up over time. This is called gunny sacking. And the big problem with gunny sacking is that all that pent-up emotion eventually explodes. When the sack bursts for Leona, she might dump all her pent-up frustration on Trek and her dad in a huge shouting match, even though they probably didn't know how upset she was in the first place. Avoidance can be useful if our goal is to keep the peace or protect others' feelings. But other times, as Leona just learned, we might want to consider a different style instead. Then there's the competing style of conflict management, which involves a high concern for self-goals and a low concern for other goals. Let's say Leona takes this approach. Instead of locking herself in her room, she's going to confront Trek and her dad with one goal in mind, making sure she wins and they lose. In order to come out on top in a conflict, people who adopt the competing style use their power in non-coercive or coercive ways. In Leona's case, non-coercive tactics, like making requests or persuading the other person, are probably the easiest route to achieving her goals. That's because they're less threatening than coercive tactics. Like, she could politely request that Trek and her dad resolve all future conflicts by, talking calmly instead of yelling insults across the dinner table, Real Housewives style. Or she could try persuading Trek by explaining that banging his fists on the table really feeds the whole dangerous ogre stereotype. If Leona's feeling extra aggressive, she might use coercive tactics instead, like threatening to lock the door to the dining room until Trek and her dad promise to make up. But the competing style of communication doesn't have to be super aggressive. And competition in relationships can be a positive thing, like when people bond over shared activities such as sports or games. Or, in Trek and Leona's case, burping contests. Another option is the accommodating conflict management style, which involves a low concern for self-goals and a high concern for other goals. People who use the accommodating style will often defer to the other parties involved in a conflict without really trying to meet their own objectives. Sometimes putting other people's needs first can help us maintain an important relationship, especially if pushing our self-goals is hurtful, or if we don't have much to lose by setting our goals aside. Like, if Trek knows that fighting really upsets Leona, he might choose to put her needs first and apologize to the king, even if the king is being a jerk. But accommodating can be harmful if we feel like we have no other choice but to accommodate the other person, like if they threaten to hurt us, or if we haven't let go of our side of the conflict. So if Trek accommodates Leona because he doesn't want her to be mad, but he's secretly planning to get back at her dad by spitting in his food, accommodating will probably lead to more conflict in the end. And no one really wants more conflict, which is why it's important to make sure that the context or situation is right for an accommodating conflict style. But what if you're trying to make sure everyone gets what they want? In that case, you might use the compromising style of conflict management, which tries to meet both self-goals and other goals. In this approach, people work to find a middle ground by conceding some points to others. It's definitely a you win some, you lose some approach. So if Leona takes the compromising approach, she might let her family fight it out for a few minutes, then step in and end the conversation. That way, everyone gets a little of what they want. Trek and the king exchange words without causing the big scene they want, and Leona gets to have a nice rest of her dinner, even though she'd rather her family get along. Compromise can be a good thing when both parties have equal power, like in a healthy partnership. And if prolonging a conflict could lead to an important relationship breaking down, compromise can be helpful too. However, compromising can sometimes lead to resentment, especially if the middle ground option isn't satisfying for anyone. In that case, everyone can end up disgruntled. So sometimes we can try collaborating, where people work together to address everyone's concerns. This method relies on open discussions, merging perspectives, and creative problem solving to create a win-win situation. Collaborating involves an even higher degree of concern for both self-goals and other goals. People who use the collaborating style are often really invested in their relationships with the other people involved, so they cooperate to solve the conflict in a positive way. If Leona takes the collaborative approach, she might ask Trek and her dad to talk through their feelings with a therapist and learn to coexist. The collaborating style can be really time-consuming because it takes lots of work and effort. Fortunately, people who use collaboration tend to be flexible and creative, so they're good at identifying common ground and finding solutions that make everyone happy. At this point, you might think that some conflict styles are better than others, but at the end of the day, each conflict management style has its place, even the ones that might seem less than ideal at first glance. In fact, how we perceive each conflict management style partly depends on the culture we grew up in. And because each culture has different values that shape our social interactions, we can't really say that a specific style is always good or always bad. Instead, research shows that how we define self-goals and how we perceive other goals during conflict largely depends on how our culture perceives the concept of face. But in this case, we aren't talking about that round thing with two eyes, a nose, and a mouth. According to face negotiation theory, face refers to the projected self we want to show to the world. And to project our preferred face to others, we go through a process called face work, which refers to the communicative strategies we use to maintain, repair, or challenge our face or another person's face. When it comes to conflict, we're most likely to adopt a conflict management style that aligns with our culture's values towards self-face and other face, which makes sense because those values probably feel comfortable and familiar to us. Each conflict management style is built around different values and communicative strategies, which means each style aligns with face work differently. For instance, it's common for individualistic cultures like those in the United States and most of Europe to be concerned with maintaining self-face. So a person from these cultures may be more likely to use the competing conflict management style to defend their reputation when someone confronts them about a problem. But people from collectivistic cultures like those in Japan and Peru might be more likely to use avoiding or accommodating conflict styles, because these cultures tend to be more concerned with maintaining other face. Avoiding and accommodating are both styles that protect the other parties from embarrassment, which shows concern for other face over self face in a conflict situation. Face negotiation theory helps us understand why people from different cultures adopt conflict management styles that we assume are unhelpful, and it can even help us communicate effectively across cultural boundaries. Like, face theory could help Leona bridge the cultural differences between her human father and her ogre husband. But at the same time, we shouldn't group cultures into the collectivistic or individualistic category based on assumptions or generalizations. Because even though people from the same cultural group may have a lot of things in common, individuals are unique, and we all have different personalities and different experiences that also shape our choices about whether to flip the Monopoly board or lose gracefully. While we can't control how other people handle conflict, we can make thoughtful choices that help to de-escalate intense emotions and start tough conversations with a positive tone. Because at the end of the day, we're responsible for how we handle ourselves in conflict situations. And taking responsibility for our actions and reactions can be the difference that makes conflict resolution more effective. Thanks for watching Study Hall, Intro to Human Communication, which is part of the Study Hall project, a partnership between ASU and Crash Course. If you liked this video and want to keep learning with us, be sure to subscribe. You can learn more about Study Hall and the videos produced by Crash Course and ASU in the links in the description. See you next time!